not in the way that it was ever taken to work like we would have known with the miners and things like that, because my father obviously worked at home. But yeah, that is probably my best or fondest memories of the pasty. But it was just a pasty, never a Cornish pasty.
Many, the words Cornish and pasty are inseparable, and it's easy to see why. You don't have to search long down here to find a good pasty shop. The simplicity of the pasty is arguably its greatest appeal. It's hearty, economical and familiar. I find it remarkable that simply the sight, taste and smell of the pasty can evoke such personal memories and cultural identification. After all, nothing defines local character like food. I want to look at the pasty in greater depth and how it came to be a Cornish entity. Why is the pasty so fiercely defended by Cornish residents? What is traditional and authentic? These are some questions I'll be exploring as I learn what the pasty means to Cornwall. The pasty has been the staple dish for Cornish domestic life for well over 200 years, and its origins can be found deep underground. The pasty was the perfect mining companion. It's portable, insulated and pocket-sized. It's a sort of package lunchbox, if you will. Miners needed plenty of carbohydrates to sustain them for long working hours, making the pasty indispensable. It's said that miners held their pasty by the thick, crimped edge like a handle to eat, to avoid arsenic poisoning. They would then discard of this spare bit and leave it to the mine knockers. Mine knockers, or bookers, were mythical spirits who would guide the miners who fed them to the riches of the mine. Others are deeply offended by the notion that miners would dare to waste any food. It was ultimately a food of hardship. Every last morsel would surely be devoured and appreciated. Whatever your view, miners and pasties went hand in hand. As the tourist industry grew, the mining industry collapsed. A product which evolved from humble agricultural beginnings is now a cornerstone of Cornish livelihood, proving a valuable asset for the local economy. Over 4 million people holiday in Cornwall each year, and when they do, the local consumption of pasties doubles. It's arguably the pasty's enduring popularity among tourists that has awarded it its Cornish prefix. People from outside the duchy refer to it as the Cornish pasty, whereas the Cornish simply refer to their signature dish as the pasty. It's been taken out of the Cornish household and into the hands of many tourists who visit down here. I'm about to meet up with Ross and Enid, 2 Cornish residents, to find out what role the pasty has played in their life. The first question I wanted to ask you both is what your earliest memory of the pasty is.
I think harvest. Obviously pasties being made to take to the harvest field, and huge pasties, pasties like this size.
Not as
No.
as that.
And they used to be all carried to the harvest field in the tin bath, the bath that we used to bath in, take it off the wall, and the pasties would be laid in a cloth. They would be carried to the harvest field. And also outings with our Sunday school, when we used to have outings from the Sunday school trip. And on that day, it was always pasty for the picnic. We'd have our savoury pasty, and then Mother would always make a sweet pasty, but that sweet pasty was only ever made on that picnic day. That was always apple, currant and spice, and if you're very lucky we had cream to put on it.
I suppose my story on that probably be completely different, because I always remember growing up and Mum making her own pasties for us, because we're only a family of 4, so obviously it was quite a few less people to cook for.
Yeah.
So Mum would always have the palaver of whether she could get pastry just right, or whether she's made enough and it's all gone in the oven, it's looked all right, and then it all starts opening up halfway through, and then she's having to patch it up and everything.
I mean, I know we have to keep the authenticity because, to protect the pasty, so I know there has to be a specific recipe and but taking it back, way back to when, the pasty was the food that, the food of the, well, we say the miner or the labourer. I mean, I know it's been said that these miners, they were so poor that they'd never actually tasted butcher's meat.
And in these pages you will take much comfort for your stomach's sake, for body's ease means rest and quiet, and here you'll find ideal diet. There's Cornish cream and pasties rare, and saffron cake beyond compare. So read, mark, learn, digest and then pass on to tray and pole and pen. The poem that you just heard was from a 1920s recipe book by the Cornwall Federation of Women's Institute. In its introduction, it aptly summarises local rival recipes. It reads that, if it is apparent that there is some slight repetition of the same recipe, it is because it varies in different districts, each of which claims that theirs is the correct one. It is true that there are pasties and there are Cornish pasties, but how exactly do you make this iconic dish? There are just so many things to consider. How should you slice the fillings? What proportion of fillings should be used? How should you crimp and glaze the pastry? I need to get an expert's opinion. I've turned to Sanjay Kumar, a talented Indian-born chef and vocal advocate for local produce. Sanjay's cooked at many a Cornish restaurant, hosted local food festivals and even appeared on the BBC to champion Cornish ingredients. I want to find out what drives his passion for food and what makes a good Cornish pasty. Let's hear what he has to say. So, for you, what makes a good Cornish pasty?
The best Cornish pasty is made with the right intention. So to start with, it has to have the right amount of fat and flour in the pastry. It has to have the oven at the right temperature. It has to have the proper crimping on the side. And the most important thing is the beef, because a Cornish pasty has good chunks of chuck steak beef, which is mixed with a nice amount of pepper, good seasoning, some turnips and potatoes. That's it. Nothing, no faffing around. People are making beef Wellington pasties and all sorts of things. And the posher you make it, it loses its core intention and the value and the taste of what it was.
So the Cornish pasty is protected under the EU's, well, currently, protected geographical indication. Do you think that's done anything for sustaining the use of local produce in the pasty production?
It isn't, let's say when pasty goes back long time before even we were born. And it used to be, if you look at the history of pasty, it used to be the Cornish man's handheld fast food. The wife used to make it with the best of intentions with her arsenic-laden fingers and throw it down the shaft, and bless him, the miner would eat the same pasty with his arsenic-laden fingers and enjoy hot during lunchtime. Now, as it has gone out of the mine and become more and more known around the world, and it has got more acceptance, it is only fair that it has got a PGI status where it is protected. It's a story, it's a food heritage, and we have to respect that.
The Cornish pasty is now safeguarded from outside influence by the EU's protected geographical indication. In 2011, the European Union approved the pasty status, awarding its own trademark. Commercially, it means that the Cornish pasty can only be named as such if it is made in the duchy and in a certain way. According to the Cornish Pasty Association, an authentic Cornish pasty must be crimped into a D shape with the crimp towards one side, must contain roughly diced or minced beef, sliced or diced potato, swede, onion and seasoning to taste. PGI is of the greatest importance because the pasty has become such a vital part of the local economy. EU protected status has also reinforced the links between pasty production and local suppliers. Due to the uncertainties posed by Brexit, I contacted the Cornish Pasty Association about the future of the Cornish pasty's special status. They responded that the Cornish Pasty Association has lobbied for the current protection of food names to continue after Brexit. We are of the view that a domestic regulation that mirrors the EU scheme is the best solution. The government has indicated that this is intention, and we know that plans are underway to create such a scheme. This will mean that the use of the Cornish pasty name will still be protected by legislation in the UK after Brexit. It may seem no surprise then that the Cornish pasty, with its contested recipes, also has contested origins. Where exactly does the Cornish pasty come from? Well, surely the clue is in the name, or maybe not. This is the argument put forward by Todd Gray, a historian at the University of Exeter who has traced the first pasty back to 16th century Plymouth in Devon. In 2006, a receipt for venison pasty ingredients was found, dated 1510, predating the earliest known Cornish recipe by 246 years. This is a controversial and regionally inflammatory claim, and one that necessitates further interrogation. I've contacted Todd Gray to find out more. Obvious place to start is maybe you explaining and introducing your research a little bit and why that has led you to believe that the pasty is not in fact from Cornwall.
Well, I think as a historian, if you look at the evidence, the first reference we have in Devon, as far as I know, and there's work to be done, I'm sure, is about 1510, and the earliest national references are more than 100 years earlier. So if one was just thinking about evidence, one would say that earlier in other parts of England than they are in Devon. And because the first Cornish reference in documents is until the mid-1700s, you could then use that argument to say they're even later in Cornwall. Behind that there's a bigger picture, which I think is all about Cornish identity and what people would like to think Cornish history is. And you get the same thing in Devon and Lincoln and Norfolk and Lancashire. You have these myths or have an idea of what history was like. And what we would say is a Cornish pasty is something that wouldn't have been recognized as a Cornish pasty not that long ago. In the 1800s, Cornish pasties were made from fish and lamb and pork, and that was for better people.
Yes.
People who were nice people who could afford nice things. Working class Cornish couldn't afford that. And a Cornish pasty to them would have been potato or turnip or herbs, nettles and parsley. So the idea of people say, the traditional Cornish pasty, like any food stuff, it has to evolve.
I guess one thing I wanted to raise was, obviously your discovery, if you want to call it that, is quite controversial and it can be seen to be detrimental to the Cornish identity. So do historians have a responsibility to be sensitive in histories that are dealing with culture?
Some historians will say you never pander. You're straightforward with the facts. And I think you can give the information. I think it is the job of the historian to be careful.
Robert McKee, writing for The Guardian, suggested that you probably got a great deal of joy for getting one over the Cornish. How would you respond to that?
No, it wasn't that at all. I was a bit reluctant, to be perfectly honest, because the whole point was to get people to go to the local history day. We were faced with the archive in Plymouth not getting the funding for a new building, and there was holes in the roofs. And I started on a campaign to make people aware of the treasures in the archive. So we had the day to do that. And it's worked because we're getting a new archive in Plymouth this next year. So it was just for that. So, what started off as a 2-minute interview to get people to come the next day I was on Spotlight live 2 or 3 days later. And then I think they had 5 days of it on the program every day. And every year it comes back. And it's kind of embarrassing because, I haven't written anything about it. I've written 40-odd books on other things. I've never written on this. So people have asked, can I read what you've written? I said, well, I haven't. It was a throwaway comment in an interview. And I give that woman credit because she was a very good journalist. She got a good story out of something I didn't even think of. And I didn't discover it.
Above all, the pasty should be celebrated for its endurance, its ability to bind communities together and its wholesome taste. In the words of Emma Mansfield, the pasty is Cornish because it had to be. It's been woven into the very fabric of Cornish life and folklore for centuries past and centuries to come. Yegis da.
Imagine standing on a beach in Cornwall. It's mouth-watering for me. Standing on a beach in Cornwall, or even in a rugby match in Cornwall with a pasty in your hand, hot, with the juice and the gravy dribbling out of the pasty into your hand, and you are biting into it, is heavenly.